Hey guys, it's Timothy here. We are in week 2 of spoilers for Amonkhet. Remember, by the end of this week, we will have the full spoiler, very likely on Friday, as is usually the case. So we're going to go ahead and jump in and see what Monday has for us here. I know I've been uploading these videos pretty much a day behind schedule, so expect these videos to be spoiled on Tuesday on my YouTube channel, and then the Tuesday ones on Wednesday, so on and so forth, but busy schedule, right? Anyway, Lily on his expertise. Nothing to do with the expertise cycle from Ether Revolt, but we still got a pretty good card here. It's 3 and double black for an enchantment. Zombies you control get +1/+1, and when it enters the battlefield, you get 2/2 zombie creature tokens. So a couple things here. First off, you're getting 6 power and 6 toughness worth of creatures for 5 mana, so this is a little bit better than just a 5 mana 6/6, which would already be a pretty good card. Not to mention that if you happen to have other zombies on the battlefield, maybe tokens, maybe embalm creatures, or embalm tokens, what have you, those also get +1/+1, so you may get even a little bit more mileage out of this card if you already have a board set up to abuse it. And then if you're able to reuse an enchantment, blanket, do anything with it, you get even additional zombies after that, even though that doesn't seem as likely. I do think they're setting us up for a white-black zombie deck for limited. Granted, most of that will be embalm creatures, but this is really interesting. It's a good card. It's definitely not a bomb. It's just a solid, basically like vanilla creature, but if you can build your deck around it, or if you first pick it, you've got a solid card here. 5 mana 6/6 is just a good card, and being able to spread that out across multiple bodies seems pretty decent as well. Also, there are a couple cards that care about tokens, and being able to put 2 tokens on the battlefield at one time is not irrelevant if you have one of those cards. So Liliana's Expertise seems like a pretty solid card. Speaking of solid, super solid, we're going to look at another green mythic here. Vizier of the Menagerie is 3 and a green. By the way, if you haven't already seen it, go check this card out on the Mana Sources channel, because Wedge from the Mana Source did have this as his spoiler card for the season, and he's always pretty good about hyping up a card a little bit more than I can. But anyway, the art here is just ridiculous too. This doesn't even look like a bird, like a snake. It's a bird, dude. But anyway, the card is 3 and a green for a 3/4. It is a Naga Cleric. You may look at the top card of your library. That doesn't let you really do anything with the card. You're not scrying it. You're not manipulating it in any way. You're just making sure that at any time you can be aware of what's on top of your library. If the top card of your library is a creature, you may cast that. So as long as you have a creature on top of your deck, you may cast it. Kind of functions the same way as if you'd had that card in your hand, so you have to pay costs. You have to do pretty much anything you would have to do if you were casting it from your hand. You have to let your opponent know that you're doing that, right? And then you may spend mana as though it were mana of any type to cast creature spells. This does have a little bit of a stipulation here that's not really relevant for the sake of limited, or at least it won't come up very often, but that whole type thing instead of color is relevant when it comes to like colorless creatures. And again, Wedge covers that on his video, which I wasn't even 100% aware of. So like you could cast a card that requires colorless mana, something from Oath of the Gatewatch, so to speak, using any color mana instead of specifically colorless mana. It's very interesting. But anyway, this is just a very good card. Is it a bomb? Probably. The fact that you can... this middle line of text is the real relevant part here. The fact that you can just take a creature that's on top of your deck and cast it is basically free card advantage, right? We've seen cards like this, like Courser of Krufix, Oracle of Moldiah, things that let you put lands from the top of your deck onto the battlefield, and those are very good. They usually function very well. They get you ahead in the game. This isn't going to ramp you. This isn't going to make sure you're hitting your land drops, but it's just super card advantage, right? If you have a creature on top of you and you're able to cast it, you play that, you still have all the cards in your hand, you're not down a card, you're actually up a card, and you can just do this multiple times. If you hit a pocket of like really cheap creatures or something, you can just go off, right? Well, not even like losing any card advantage out of your hand. And the body's pretty good too, like 3/4 for 4. Just solid, very, very solid body for a card like this. It could have been much weaker, but it's not. I think this card is fantastic. I would love to play with it. The only thing that really throws me off is like how in your face the art is and how like out of place it is for Amonkhet. But this card is fantastic and will very likely see play in formats outside of Limited. But for the sake of Limited, it's super strong. Very, very strong. Can let you get really far ahead. 1 in a blue for an instant censor, not censorship. Censor, 1 in a blue. You may counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. I'm sorry, it's not a May ability. And you can cycle it for 1 blue. So normally this sort of effect, this like Mana Tithe ability or Spell Pierce ability, no, Force Spike, that sort of ability is just not really that good for limited because it's really only good early, and if you draw it in the late game, it kind of falls off. But this is good for a control deck. If you want to be a controlling deck, you might get somebody with this in the early game. If you don't, it's 1 blue to cycle it, right? You're not paying a premium to get rid of it and draw a new card in its place. And the times that you do get somebody with a cheap counterspell like this are going to be significant and can really sway a game in your favor. I'm not really a big fan of these type of counterspells where your opponent can pay out of them because they do get a lot worse as the game goes on, and your opponent has a way to get around them. But plus, you're able to play around them too if you're aware of them. But cycling just makes the world better. It makes the world keep ticking. And if you know that your opponent's smart, they're not gonna tap out, they're going to leave 1 up, or they just happen to have 1 up from something, you just cycle this instead and you get some late game value out of a card that normally just dies in the late game. So probably a little bit better than it looks. Still not thrilled about it, but keep in mind blue does have a couple payoffs for 1 and 2 cycle anyway, and if you're in a controlling late game deck, it's not irrelevant. Our white god here, the cat overlord, is Oketra the True. 3 and a white for a legendary god. It is a 3/6. Oh, there's the masterpiece art. Sweet. A 3/6. Emphasis on 3/6 here. Double strike and indestructible, so not vigilance like I thought. I was wrong about that. Cannot attack or block unless you control at least 3 other creatures. Very manageable and limited. And then for 3 and a white, you create a 1/1 white warrior creature token with vigilance. So the tokens have vigilance. This card's good. I don't know what it is about white here, but white just has like straight bombs for majority of its rares. Not all of them, but majority. Granted, all the mythics are insane too, but compare this to the other gods and you've got a card that's much easier to get its ability going, or much easier to get it as a relevant attacker and blocker. Having 4 creatures on the battlefield, including this thing, is not impossible by any means, especially when you have an activated ability that just puts a creature on the battlefield. This is much more likely to happen than you being able to hold on to 7 cards in your hand constantly for Kefnet, or just playing empty-handed, which is not something I like to do for Hazaret. This is leaps and bounds better than the other 2 so far. In a color that already floods the board pretty well and makes a bunch of 1/1s, and then a 3/6 double striker is impossible to kill in combat, and it's indestructible, so you're not killing it anyway. This demands that your opponent have some sort of exile effect or some sort of way to just keep the board clean of 1/1s and other creatures. And even if like your opponent board wipes, you have this activated ability here, which is just an ability that we've seen be relevant in a lot of other games, right, or a lot of other formats. The ability to make tokens for a decent amount of mana is just a good mana sink, and that leads me to believe that Oketra is just already like at the top of the pinnacle when it comes to the gods. Kefnet being kind of at the bottom there, and then Hazaret being decent, even though it has a little bit of a finicky activation cost, so to speak. Perhaps not the best use of words, but I think Oketra, again, is just a solid bomb here. 3-power double striker with, ridiculous toughness that doesn't really matter because it's indestructible anyway, and a perfectly reasonable way to get it online. So very strong god here. Better be, seeing how she shows up in a lot of the art, but was not expecting Embalm to branch out into green here. We've seen 1 blue card that has Embalm. This is a green card with Embalm. The majority of it's white, so it's probably tertiary in green, but I don't know for sure. We'll have to see how many other cards have it. But Honored Hydra is like your standard green thing for the set, like your standard big green creature rare. If they were still doing intro packs, this would be like the alternate art intro pack rare, right? But Honored Hydra is 5 and a green for a 6/6 Snake Hydra. It is a rare, obviously, and it has trample. So 6 mana, 6/6 trample. Decent card, not the worst. Like, I don't know. It seems more playable in this format than it was in Amonkhet, where games are probably going to go a little bit longer this time around. But the real power here is in the Embalm ability, which is 3 and a green, and then you get this guy, which is awesome. Turns into a white zombie snake Hydra. My guess is when they came up with the embalm mechanic and they realized they wanted everything to be a zombie when it came back, they're like, okay, what are the coolest creature types we can come up with? Angel zombie, Hydra zombie, right? So they just threw them all in there. But this card is good. A lot of people have made references to Roar of the Worm, and if you played Eternal Masters recently, then you know this card's probably really, really good most of the time, right? Yeah, you can cast it straight out and get a 6/6 for 6, which is what you're going to do a lot of the time. But if you happen to mill this, or you happen to discard it, or, I don't know, your opponent mind rots you and you put it in the graveyard by some means, you have the ability to pay for a 4-mana 6/6, which is great. So this is good out of the graveyard. It's good if you cast it because it probably demands a removal spell or a double block of some sort, and you're fine with that because you can just pay 4 mana the next turn and get it back, or during the same turn, and then they have to deal with the same threat. So this is really strong. It is a little bit on the vanilla-y side when it comes to the actual stats, but trample is really nice on these big green creatures, and being able to bring it back for another go seems really nice. Again, I'm not going out of my way to call it a bomb because it does cost 6 mana, but it seems like a very strong card, and I'd be happy to have it in my green decks. I don't know. It's interesting to see a green embalm card. A mummified zombie. Really cool, right? Cards that people are going to complain about? Never. 1 black for Never, which is a rare sorcery. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. Return is a sorcery from the graveyard for 3 and a black. You may exile target card from a graveyard and create a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So I'm just going to go ahead and get it out there. No, this is not Hero's Downfall. Yes, it's just as disappointing as Ruinous Path. No, this is not the planeswalker removal we need. There. Okay. Back to limited, right? This is just a good card for the sake of limited. You would play this every single time if you're in black. You're not splashing for it since it's double black, but if you're in black, you would first pick this. You would very, very happily welcome this in any black deck you play. Unconditional removal that can, 10% of the time hit a planeswalker. Probably not even 10% of the time. They just don't come up that often. But 3 mana, sorcery speed, kill a creature is a fine limited card. Granted, not something you're like super, super stoked about in your rare. Being sorcery speed is still a problem in limited the same way it is in constructed, but all around solid card. Return I'm a less excited about, but the same way I've mentioned, or the same thing I've mentioned about some of these other Aftermath cards, this is a bonus, right? Don't think about this as like some sort of cost you're really paying and some sort of, I don't know, steep hill you're trying to climb. You're casting Never, and if you just go through the rest of the game never casting Return in the entire game, you're fine with it because you already got the effect you wanted. Consider this an extra bonus, and while it's way, way, way overcosted for what it does, it's decent. It is pretty good against embalm creatures. If you know your opponent has one in the graveyard, and it's your turn, you can just get rid of it and get a 2/2 out of the deal, which those zombies might be relevant, but I don't know. Overall, this is a solid card for limited. You'll pick it every single time, and it's mostly because of the top half, with the second half being just a little bit of a nudge towards, it probably nudges it from like a 7.5 to an 8 or an 8 to an 8.5. Not like, it doesn't significantly change the way I'll evaluate the card. Pull from Tomorrow. I think this was Star City Games spoiler for the season. I might be wrong about that, but Pull from Tomorrow is 2 blue and X for a rare instant. Draw X cards, then discard a card. So it doesn't matter how many cards you're drawing, you always just discard 1 card. This starts at, you can pay blue and a blue to discard a card, right? That seems really terrible. But for X, you're paying 3 mana to draw and discard. That's not very good. For 2, you're paying 4 mana at instant speed to draw 2 cards and discard, and that's still not that great. 4 mana instant speed, draw 2. Is a little bit on the weak side, and then once you get to 3+, I think that's where the card starts to get pretty good. At 3 mana, you're paying 5 total to draw 3 cards and discard a card, and that I'm okay with. And then anything past that, you're already in a point where you're winning the game because you're able to tap so much at instant speed for a draw spell, and you're just gonna load your hand up with lots of good stuff. This reminds me a lot, I know it's not the same cost, this reminds me a lot of Wildest Dreams from Kaladesh or Aether Revolt or whatever set that was in. The green XX spell that could get cards back from your graveyard to your hand. I know it's not functionally the same, so don't crucify me for that. But anyway, the way it functions is It's a late game card. It's not something you want to do really early, but you do have the option to do it early if you want to. The real power of these cards comes in being decent early and really, really good late. This one's not that good early, though, so this is really only a late game card. X needs to be 3 or higher for me to even be like really interested in this card. At X equals 2, you're just getting like a much worse Glimmer of Genius, which is just a solid limited card as is. So Pull from Tomorrow, not a card that I'm super happy to be my rare, I don't think, but if I'm on a blue deck, I don't think I'm cutting this card either, because it does give you such an advantage in the late game if you get there, and with all of the really cheap cycle-in control spells and counter spells we've seen in this set, it seems like you can get to the late game pretty often. So Pull from Tomorrow's got a thumbs up for me, but it's not a card I'm excited to buy any means, really. Unburden is 1 and double black for a sorcery. It's a common. Target player discards 2 cards. You can target yourself, by the way. Ooh. And you can cycle this for 2 generic mana. Mind Rot, card that every time I see it, I'm disappointed by. Again, cycling makes any card playable, and the cycling cost isn't like super crazy or anything. It's just generic cycling for 2. I really don't like Mind Rot as a card, and being double black instead of 2 in black is really, really annoying as well, because you want your Mind Rots to be cast early most of the time. And just making it harder to cast, that's annoying. So what they did was they took Mind Rot, they gave Cyclone, and they're like, instead of making it 4 mana, let's just make it a little harder to cast on turn 3. This is the type of card you could totally play in your limited deck. It's just not a card I'm a fan of. There's nothing wrong with Mind Rot. It's a natural 2 for 1. But discard spells are so bad in the late game that I'm not really interested in playing them at all. This one has Cyclone, but I would rather have a card that's proactive most of the time and also has Cyclone than a card that's dead sometimes and also has Cyclone. This is very similar to like the artifact removal spell that also has Cyclone for green, in that it's not a really strong effect that you would include in your deck, but it's totally playable in the main deck because of Cyclone. So if I had a payoff for Cyclone, this is a card I'd maybe be inclined to put in my main deck more often. But if I had no sort of payoffs, it's just not a card that I'm really excited by. And if I'm just playing cards for the sake of Cyclone, I think I can do better. This one's interesting. I think this one was... I know it says on the last page. I just haven't been checking. I think this one was spoiled on the command... I don't know. Whatever it's called. Sorry, guys. Nihab, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right or not. Nihab the Worthy is 1 black and a red for a 2/2 rare legendary Minotaur warrior. So for all of those people clamoring since Theros to have a legendary Minotaur for your bad Minotaur commander decks, here you go. Nihab is your guy. Reminds me of Ishkanah. Like, people see it and they're like, I have to build Spider Tribal deck now. Please don't. Anyway, the card, right? 3 mana, 2/2, first strike. That's fine. That's a decent card. Other Minotaurs you control have first strike. We've seen a couple Minotaurs in red and black, so very Theros-y. Giving first strike to a bunch of your other creatures seems good, though. And then the real power is right here. As long as you have 1 or fewer cards in your hand, Minotaurs you control get +2/+0, and that includes himself. So he would be a 4/2 first striker, which is just impossible to remove in combat for the vast majority of the game. And then if you happen to have other Minotaurs, that gets really out of hand really fast too, right? So you're incentivized to play this guy on turn 3 and then empty your hand as much as possible. So it fits in the same kind of decks that you're playing Hazoret in, right? Black-Red has this theme of being able to empty your hand. We've already seen this with a couple cards that make you discard your own cards. And then, I keep saying Hennab. Have I been saying Hennab? I don't know. Nihab also has an ability when he deals combat damage to a player, each player discards a card. So that's a little bit of a double-edged sword or spear or whatever you want to call it. Your opponent has to discard a card, and normally those sort of creatures are good, especially ones that are hard to kill in combat because they're more likely to get through anyway or demand a chump block. But you also have to discard a card, so you got to really want this bonus in order for you to even play this card. If you don't want to be discarding cards, you don't want to be attacking with this, you don't want it to deal damage. A lot of times, I think my opponent's going to play this card, and as long as they don't have a field full of Minotaurs, I'm probably okay taking 2 because they're going to be down a card I will be too, but at least it's at parity, right? If I have any sort of card advantage going, I'm probably fine taking the hit here. Granted, this does turn into a 4-power first striker at some point, but it never gains any toughness boost, so it can still be killed off with cards like Magma Spray, so on and so forth. So if there is an aggressive Hellbent-based deck in the format that it takes advantage of Minotaurs and, I don't know, discard spells and all sorts of stuff, then Nihab is a fine card, but I don't think this is a bomb by any chance. I do think it's the type of rare that you take early, you take first pick perhaps, and you have direction to your draft, very similar to the blue-white guy that we saw, the legendary, or Hapatra, the red or green-black legendary creature. They're not like flashy, they're not super strong, but they give direction to your draft, which is what you want out of a gold rare card. But I could see passing this for a really strong uncommon removal spell or something along those lines if I didn't want to commit to 2 colors. In a casual draft, I'm going to draft it every time because it seems sweet. But if I were in the competitive setting, like the first sealed GP for Amonkhet or something like that, I don't know, I might give it a pass. A couple more cards here. Oh, I see a couple I haven't seen yet. Reduce to Rubble is 2 and a blue for Reduce. That's an instant, uncommon, counter target spell unless its controller pays 3. I just kind of gave you guys the whole spiel about this when it came to Censor. This is very likely going to counter a spell as long as you draw it from turn 1 to turn 5 somewhere, right? You're almost always going to get a spell, but you can't always afford to just keep 3 mana up, and a really smart player knows how to play around these sorts of effects, especially if they've seen it in one game and you're in game 2 or 3. If you hold up the mana, you can kind of bluff it, but your opponent either plays into it or they don't, and if they don't, that's really bad for you because you kept mana up for it. But you could get somebody and then it just drops off in the late game and becomes almost an irrelevant card, right? A lot of people, they'll just cast this really late in the game to make their opponent use up mana so they can't do 2 things in one turn, which is not what you want to be doing with a whole resource, right? A whole card. Rubble from the graveyard is 2 and a red. Cast it from your graveyard, obviously. Aftermath. Up to 3 target lands don't untap during their controller's next untap step. So this is kind of a cute little interaction, right? Your opponent uses a bunch of mana to pay for something. You cast Rubble on your next turn. They don't untap those lands. I don't think this card is super strong, and I think that Wizards knows that too, since this is not a rare, but an uncommon. But it feels like an uncommon, right? There's a little bit of interaction here. These counter spells, they're not great, but they do work a decent amount of the time. And they show up in lots of limited sets. I would almost never play this card, and I would really want Rubble to be here to justify playing this card, but then I'm committed to blue-red, and I don't know how that's going to work out in this format, or if there's even a deck to be had in blue-red, but I don't know. I don't see this card being super strong unless you're like all-in control, blue-red control, and you have some sort of reason to be tapping your opponent's lands. A lot of times you're going to be using your turn to skip your opponent's turn, right? And if you're in a position where you can cast Rubble and also another spell, then it's very likely your opponent's in a similar position. Granted, nobody's like mana screwed. Where this does get really annoying is when your opponent is mana screwed, you counter their spell and then you stop their lands from untapping too. Just blow out, right? You win the game. But I don't know. I think this is more of an annoyance than it is like a really good split card. There aren't a lot of split cards or aftermath cards that I've given like big thumbs up to, and most of them are rare. But I don't know. There's a little bit of playability. I've never played with the mechanic, right? So I don't honestly know. This is the last card that I've seen, so it looks like there might be 1 or 2 more cards that I haven't seen yet. Doomed Dissenter is 1 and a black for a 1/1 common human. I always think the human creature type looks really weird when it's just by itself. Thumbs up this video if you think human looks weird. I don't care. Anyway, when it dies, you get a 2/2 black zombie creature token. So I like the flavor of this card. It's a dude who kind of got outcast and then he dies and he leaves behind a zombie, right? Somehow the zombie's stronger than the human, but I'm not sure how that works out. Maybe he's just really weak, or a coward. I don't know. But anyway, this is a fine card. I haven't seen really any incentive to play like, or any sort of like support for a sacrifice theme in this set. So it's kind of odd to have this card. 2 mana to play this and then just chump with it. Doesn't seem like where you want to be. You want this to be trading with an opponent's creatures. So if there are a lot of X1s, this is the type of card I'd be happy to have in my deck. Or if I have payoffs for these tokens, which I mentioned with Liliana's expertise, then I'm a lot happier to play this sort of card. But as is, the card is just fine. If there are some sort of sacrifice payoffs or there's some sort of payoff for killing your own creature or something along those lines, this is the type of card that fits perfectly in that shell. In fact, it's it's like part of the reason you would play cards like that in the first place. But as is, this is just an okay card that you could main deck, and it replaces itself. It chump blocks, and then you get a actual creature out of the deal. But if this were like 1 black, make a 2/2 when it dies, that'd be really, really strong. Probably an uncommon. As is, adding that 1 extra mana and making this a 2 mana 1/1 seems to lower its power significantly. I think you want this more if you want zombies in your deck or if you want tokens in your deck. I think that's the idea. So let's read these cards real quick. Looks like there's 2 of them here. Quarry Hauler, or Quarry Hauler is Quarry Hauler. That's a fun name. 3 and a green for a 4/3 common camel creature. When it enters the battlefield, for each kind of counter on target permanent, put another counter of that kind on it or remove 1 from it. Ooh, interesting. So for each kind of counter means that this isn't doubling, it's just putting an additional counter or removing an additional counter, and it's target permanent, so you have to choose one thing. So already see where this is going, right? You can essentially proliferate a single card. You either choose an opponent's creature that has a -1/-1 counter on it, and you put another one there. There is that card, the Oracle's Vault, or whatever it's called, that has brick counter, so you can pump that up and put another brick counter on it, which seems awesome. Or I guess just put 1/1 counters on your own creatures. We haven't seen a lot of 1/1 counters in this set, have we? It's more like really high toughness, high power, high toughness creatures that get -1/-1 counters instead of little guys that get +1/+1 counters. One thing worth mentioning, it has nothing really to do with this card, but if you have a -1/-1 counter on a creature and you put a +1/+1 counter on it, both those counters seem to exist. They cease to exist. They negate each other out. It's not like they're both there and they just coexist and nullify each other. They actually literally actually get rid of each other. Actually, figuratively, actually is what I think I just said. But this seems like a solid card, even if you're not getting any sort of extra bonus out of it. It is a 4 mana 4/3, which is perfectly fine and limited. Granted, 3 toughness. A 4 mana 4/3 is worse than a 4 mana 3/4 majority of the time because it trades down in combat a lot more often. But this card seems sweet, and I like it. Be on the lookout for other cards that get special types of counters, not flood counters. It doesn't work with that card, but anything that gets any sort of special counters is something to consider here. And yeah, I like it. Let's check out this last card. Pyramid of the Pantheon is 1 mana for a rare artifact. 1 mana artifact. All right, let's check it out. You may pay 2 mana and tap it. Add 1 mana of any color to your mana pool. Put a brick counter. There you go, brick counter on Pyramid of the Pantheon. So you're paying 2 mana to get a mana. All right, so that's not good, but the brick counter probably does something. You may also tap it to add 3 mana of any 1 color to your mana pool. Activate this ability only if there are 3 or more brick counters on Pyramid of the Pantheon. Ah, okay. So you're getting a Gilded Lotus, essentially. Those of you who don't know what Gilded Lotus, boom, taps to add 3 mana. But that costs 5, right? The idea here is you're investing mana into this card. You're playing off curve very likely. For instance, you play this on turn 1, and then on turn 2, if you're using this, you still have access to a mana because you're filtering 2 mana to get 1 out of it. But you're putting a brick counter on it. And then once this gets up to 3 brick counters, you have a ton of extra mana. You've invested a lot of extra mana into this card, and the result is that you get a lot of extra mana out of it. Obviously, really good with the camel. I don't know if you would play this in limited very often unless you had a really big payoff for needing all that extra mana. I guess by turn 2, 3, 4, I guess by turn 5, this could be active if you invest a lot of mana into this and you play off-curve creatures. It essentially sets you a whole turn behind. It's almost like having a land destroyed if you do use the ability every single turn, which doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world because the payoff is really nice. But again, you have to have an incentive for really wanting that sort of mana. And I'm not sure if there's like a huge payoff for having that much mana. Maybe if there's like a fireball or something, but then you're playing red and you're really aggressive anyway. So I don't know. This is a card that really intrigues me. I don't know. I'll have to go back and look at like what kind of decks we'd be making here. It doesn't seem like green decks would want to play this because even though green decks usually have big payoffs that come around turn 5 or 6, you'd rather be playing your mana to like put mana dorks and early game creatures on the battlefield and just be beaten down, right? Red decks surely don't want this because they want to be tapping out aggressively turn after turn. It's probably the blue decks that really want this, where you need the extra mana to take advantage of effects like Kefnet, where you're drawing a bunch of extra cards or getting some sort of advantage. So I don't know if this is like exclusively a blue card or anything like that, but be on the lookout for X spells where this could be a little bit better. Cut to Ribbons has an X in it. I don't know. I'm a little stretching here. I'm interested about this one. I didn't get time to really think about this ahead of time or read comments, so I'm really interested where this is going. And it's interesting there's another card with brick counters on it. That's the second one. I did just mention the other one. But let's be sure we're not missing any extra spoilers, and then we will go ahead and call it a day. Lots of really cool stuff still going on. I think this set's going to be fantastic. Yeah, so lots of really cool things going on in this set. We'll call it a day there. Anyway, my name's Timothy. Thanks for hanging out with me. If you have anything you want to comment about any of these cards, I'm super interested to hear what you guys say. And as always, I'll be back probably a day late, so sorry about that. Maybe I'll be on time. I don't know. But anyway, thanks for hanging out. My name's Timothy, and I'll see y'all next time.